So throughout the day, we've been featuring several research presentations being developed through our SSHRC-funded research partnerships project. And we've been trying to integrate community practitioner perspectives throughout the day. But we want to take an hour at the end of the day to simply reflect on the theme, building rural resilience through entrepreneurship and innovation, and to reflect on some of the presentations throughout the day and discuss some practitioner perspectives, be they for economic developers, be they for small business owners and entrepreneurs, or be they for policymakers as well. And so we're pleased to have a wonderful panel joining us today. Again, as with others, full bios are in your packages. But we're joined by Victoria Lennox, co-founder and CEO of Startup Canada, Susan Anzolin, Director General for Innovation and Economic Development with FedDev, and Craig Desjardins, our longstanding partner with the Monison Centre, who's Executive Director of Pella CFTC. And so for the format of the panel, where each panelist is going to give a few opening comments, and then we're going to take some time to discuss the themes of the day, and then we'll include some time for discussion with the audience if you want to provide your reflections from the day or questions of discussion for the panel as well. So maybe we'll just go down the line, and Victoria, so maybe if you want to give some opening comments first.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yes? No? Okay. Better? Excellent. So good afternoon, everyone. It's just a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me this afternoon. It's been really insightful to be able to sit and watch the presentations, in particular this afternoon. I wasn't here in the morning, but to really see kind of from an academic standpoint how some of these issues and the characteristics of entrepreneurs and their success are really being discussed from this perspective. I guess the perspective that I'm going to bring to the panel this afternoon is really kind of from a next generation entrepreneurial movement that's really taking over the world and is actually relatively new in Canada, but widespread throughout the States and Europe and this startup revolution. So I'm representing today Startup Canada. I'm the co-founder of Startup Canada along with Cyprian Shalenkiewicz, who joined me today. And Startup Canada is a national nonprofit organization that launched less than a year ago without a mandate at the time. We went on a national tour across Canada. We went to 40 communities, so not just the big urban centers, but smaller communities like Bathurst, New Brunswick, Medicine Hat, and we met with 20,000 Canadian entrepreneurs, creating essentially what was the largest consultation of entrepreneurs in Canadian history. And that resulted last autumn in something called the Startup Blueprints, so startupblueprints.ca. If you go there, you'll see the full culmination of our findings through video series and as well as a report. So that might be useful for this particular audience, so startupblueprints.ca. But the whole objective of the national tour, being run by entrepreneurs across Canada, in a fully volunteer-run movement. I'm a volunteer, Cyprian's a volunteer. We have hundreds of volunteers across Canada and a network of over 50,000 entrepreneurs, all within less than a year. You can see the sense of this movement, but what we decided to do without a mandate is to ask Canadian entrepreneurs, very similar to what we heard earlier today, what are some of the challenges you're facing and how can we start up Canada? But let's put it back on ourselves as entrepreneurs and how can we start up Canada? How can we fuel an industry-led business entrepreneurial movement where entrepreneurs in Canada start to take our economic development and activity into our own hands? We have a really strong public sector in Canada. We have excellent infrastructure that support entrepreneurs, which is indicated by everyone in the room today. But why is it that we continue time and again to kind of fail to reach great heights? And why are the blackberries so one-off? Just a few things, opening kind of remarks about Startup Canada and the perspective I'm bringing today. Is that Startup Canada, we launched with provincial networks, and what I love is that we're having a regional discussion. We're moving into a community-based model, which I'm really excited about to launch a pilot initiative of a national network of startup communities across Canada that are entrepreneur-led, which is super exciting. But what I want to really bring to this discussion today is, yes, the 50,000 entrepreneurs that are part of our network that tend to be younger, who kind of represent the small business side of things, not even the medium-sized business size of business of things. But I think when we're talking about economic development, we think about the policy implications of federal legislation and regulations in the startup visa program. We tend to think of all these top-down things. When the provincial government makes a regulatory change, how does that have implications on entrepreneurs? But I think what we fail to bring into these policy discussions is all the awesome things that are happening at the grassroots level with entrepreneurs coming together and fueling their own ecosystems. Entrepreneur-led accelerators, co-working spaces, startup drinks, startup weekends, demo camps, really cool things happening on the ground. And I'm hoping to really bring that to the discussion. So with the startup blueprints, findings from the national tour, national consultation, I can definitely bring those. But also what we're seeing across the country in terms of just the excitement of the next generation in finding themselves in entrepreneurship, not just as an economic development path, but as a way of living and being and as a mindset. So just, I guess, a few comments just based on what I heard this afternoon is really, we're seeing a lot of progress when sectors come together, when we have academic and industry coming together, when you have municipal, provincial, and federal working together with a common and unified vision. I'd suggest more than just consulting with entrepreneurs, engaging them in the solutions, and as equal partners in driving forward these types of economic development shifts and changes. So I think all of that is kind of what I'll bring, and I'm just taking a look here to see if there's anything else I wanted to speak about here. But no, I think I'll leave it with that. But I'm really excited for the discussion this afternoon, and I can't wait to really dig deeply into some of these issues. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Susan.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Anzolin, and I'm the Director General for Innovation and Economic Development at FedDev Ontario. FedDev Ontario was created in 2009, and so we're kind of the new kids on the block from the federal government side. So really excited to be here and be part of this discussion, because on a daily basis, I work with my team to really identify opportunities where we can foster innovation and encourage entrepreneurship. So what I want to do in my opening comments, and I'll try to be short, like Victoria, so that we can get on to the dialogue, is really try to marry some of the things that we're doing at FedDev Ontario and some of the themes that I heard this morning. So we'll start off with fostering innovation through academic community partnerships. And I think Jeff and Yolande really provided us a great foundation in terms of some of the key themes that I see through my work. Partnerships are key. None of us have enough resources to do this together. We need to work together. And so one of the programs that I administer through FedDev is called Applied Research and Commercialization. This is where we partner small businesses with post-secondary institutions across Southern Ontario. And this is really about businesses leading and pulling the information that they need to commercialize their products. So we're marrying the applied research and the expertise of academic institutions with the market reality and potential offered by the small businesses. Through ARC, so $30 million we've dedicated or invested over the last few years, we've created 570 collaborations across Southern Ontario. Great success, in my opinion, and this really led to some really exciting initiatives happening at all across Southern Ontario. When we looked at our analysis, we found that 80% of the relationships were new. So this was really important to us because we didn't want universities and community colleges to continue the relationship they had with already businesses. We wanted them to go out there and find new businesses. We want businesses to recognize that the capacity exists in their areas to really allow them to prosper even more. So 80% new relationships. We also found that most of the businesses were going to their local community college or their local university. So I think that relationship is critically important because it really allows for the region to benefit from this relationship between business and academia. There was one observation that we made that there were certain areas that really didn't have any collaboration, and these were predominantly rural areas. And as a result, we decided to invest a little bit more money in terms of allowing universities and colleges to proactively target these community areas so that they could outreach to these businesses. So one of my observations is that sometimes you have to put in a little bit more investment to connect with rural businesses. And I think, in my opinion, our investment in terms of this targeted outreach really paid off great dividends. We went from 3 rural communities benefiting from our investments, 3 out of 300, to 20 out of 270. So, I know we need to do better, but it does show that if you do purposely target rural communities and rural businesses, you can have an impact. But it does cost money. And I think as government, we need to recognize that. The other thing I will say is that rural businesses and rural communities have to have a greater awareness. So I think there's an onus on all of us to do a better job in terms of raising the awareness of programs and services. Thirdly, I think there is an onus on the business. So you can't just wait for government or others to come to you. You also have to seek opportunities. Moving on, creative economy. I thought Kevin's presentation was great. I think we really do have to do a better job of unleashing human creativity, imagination, and original thinking. These are things that can't be outsourced. And so if you're in a rural community, you've got your human capital. We need to find a way of really capitalizing on that human capital. One of the things that we've done at FedDev is really try to nurture a culture of innovation. And you have to start with your young people. And I'm glad Victoria said, her organization works with young entrepreneurs. At FedDev, we actually started working with a youth as young as kindergarten age to allow them to get excited. Now, we focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So youth aged from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. We wanted them to get excited about the STEM fields of study so that they would be encouraged to pursue further education in these areas, or pursue a career in this area or start a business. But we also learned that it isn't just about the STEM fields of study. Innovation can be found anywhere. So we really need to encourage a generation of young people to be innovative, to have critical thinking. And so I think there's, a continued need for governments and others to invest in young people. Another one of the initiatives that we have at FedDev is to match graduates with small businesses. And it's called the Graduate Enterprise Internship. So we have provided funding through universities and colleges to graduate students so that they can be paired with small businesses. And we know that small businesses have difficulty. They don't have the time to recruit people, nor do they always have the money. So the funding we provide subsidize the interns to go into these startup companies. And I say startups because the one lesson we learned is that startups offer phenomenal learning experience for graduates. And especially rural businesses can offer a phenomenal learning experience for graduates. So we're trying to ensure that more rural businesses take advantage of our graduate students. And I think it's also another way of getting our youth to kind of be able to recognize that they can stay in their home communities. The next topic we heard was financing rural ventures. This is obviously an area of great interest for FedDev. And one of the things I'm going to start off with, we heard a lot about the CFDCs. I think they've been a great partner in terms of all of the research initiatives you've heard today. FedDev provides operating funding to the community, to the CFDCs, the 37 CFDCs across Southern Ontario. And I just want to read some of the statistics that our partners through the CFDCs, and I'm turning to Craig, and many of you in the room who are CFDCs have really been, the leaders in terms of making these outcomes happen. So we have provided through the 37 CFDCs assistance for counseling and financing to 13,900 rural businesses over the last 5 years. and invested $191 million through 3,382 loans. These activities have translated into 38,590 jobs created or maintained in rural Ontario and Southern Ontario. Pretty impressive. Also through the CFDCs, we recognized that we had great partners and we wanted to expand our efforts to be more innovative. And so we created two funds called the Southern Ontario Fund for Investment in Innovation. And through SOFI, we are starting to fund innovative companies in rural Ontario and urban Ontario. So moving from CFDCs, I recognize that through the other programs that weren't necessarily exclusively focused on rural areas, that we needed to do a better job of making sure that we were connecting with rural communities. And so the Scientists and Engineers in Business provides business development skills. And again, this echoes what we heard earlier today in terms of some of the things that are necessary for rural resilience. So it's making sure that our entrepreneurs have business skills development and that they have seed financing to start up innovative companies. We've done that through Scientists and Engineers in Business. In fact, we have one of our partners here, Wendy Curtis with Northumberland CFDC. Through the CFDC, we have funded 22 startup companies, innovative startup companies. We also have funding going through the regional innovation centers. And these are mainly located in urban areas, and I know many of you are probably familiar with the RICs, which is the centers established by the province. We need to do a better job of linking RICs with CFDCs and with our rural entrepreneurs. And so through Venture Start, we have started to do that. You can access Venture Start regardless of where you are, anywhere, anytime, and it provides you with skills development and seed financing. Lastly, I want to just mention in terms of moving from seed financing, debt financing. We had a great panel on equity financing, and at FedDev, we also recognized that we needed to do a better job of ensuring that businesses had access to capital along the entire continuum. And so through our program on investing in business innovation, FedDev is boosting private sector investment to accelerate commercialization of new products, processes, and practices. Our investment of $57 million has leveraged over $170 million in investment capital, $22 million of foreign investment. We have supported the tripling of Angel Network members across Southern Ontario from 283 to 977, and I think we're trying to make an effort. We heard about an earlier presentation of making sure that angel investors are more transparent. We're creating angel networks across Southern Ontario so that businesses are aware of where they can seek angel investment. With respect to rural communities, we have started to make those partnerships, but I will say we need to do a better job. So I end where I started. Partnerships are key. Eager to have the discussion with you in terms of how we can continue to partner with you. I should also mention that March 21st had a great announcement for us from the Budget 2013. The Government of Canada recognized in our efforts. I hope that was one of the reasons. I said to Craig, I think the other reason they did provide FedDev with ongoing funding is thanks to our stakeholders and our clients, because it's really thanks to you that we continue to demonstrate outcomes, good outcomes throughout Southern Ontario. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And Craig.
Thank you, Jeff. As I was reflecting today on the excellent presentations, I sort of took some personal experience. One of my personal outcomes of my involvement with the Monison Centre over the last 6 years, hard to believe it's 6 years, is that I get to lecture at the School of Business here. And I recently gave a lecture on startups to a group of MBAs, and the topic was understanding your market. And it was all about how markets change. And I couldn't help but think how that was sort of an undercurrent of many of the presentations today. Change in labor markets, change in capital markets. I know from my perspective as running a CFTC, we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years a very significant change in the capital markets. In the past, distant past, if you were a business, you were looking for a loan, you had to go in to see the commercial lending officer. It was a very rigorous and onerous experience. Today, you go in and they give you a line of credit secured by a second mortgage on your house. So they've very much opened or expanded into that market to meet that demand. So the CFTCs have had to look to new ways to be creative to sort of address the market. But again, as part of that lecture, I talk about changing environments, how disruptive technology is changing the way we do business. How market research plays such an important role, research like we're talking about today here. So I'd come up with a couple of sort of key themes that I'm focusing on, my organization is focusing on, and they seem particularly relevant to many of our discussions today, and I'll just give you some reflections. One of the first themes that we're very focused on is the notion of increasing business productivity. Productivity is a big issue. You hear politicians and academics talk about it all the time, but it sometimes is a hard issue to sort of get your head around. It really involves how efficient we are with output, how much we create. And it came up a couple of times in discussions today about how efficient we are, or how efficient rural businesses are with the adoption of technology. I think Conrad made a comment about how many of our retail, and we've done some stats on Eastern Ontario, anywhere from 12 to 22% of our economies, depending on which community you're in, is employed. That percentage is how many people are employed in the retail sector. That is a serious issue. As more and more goes to the cloud, as more and more is dealt with in Bangalore and faraway places, those jobs will disappear. How do we address that? How do we plan for that? The second one was, as it relates to access to capital, is improving high-risk capital. So the whole area of venture capital and angel capital. How do we harness that? And Susan has brought up several programs that FedDev has put forward to improve that business development access. We happen to believe at Pella CFTC, and working with the private sector, that we have another model that might be able to assist, and we're working with FedDev on that. The other thing we heard was around supporting more efficient labor force through improving skills and education and human capital. There's just been a big study that's came out in the States that talks about how do you grow high-tech companies. And of course, everybody wants to know that. That's where the high-paying jobs are. What are the key factors? This project was about a year and a half long. It involved every U.S. state, and it identified 5 different topics or key factors that influenced the development of these businesses. Funny that the number one factor in terms of correlation was parkland and amenities. And I said, wow, I got a lot of that. So do you. Then it was capital, and I said, gee, I happen to be in the capital business. Then it talked about broadband. Hey, didn't Eastern Ontario just launch a program that the Modison Centre is looking at broadband, and we're installing that and announcing the rollout of that program. One of the challenges, though, is it requires a lot of youth, and that's when many of us face a struggle of youth out migration. And the other one was labor migration, and that was, of course, the topic of the presentation just before, bringing in new immigrants into our labor market. So, you can look very negatively about some of the challenges, but, several of those items are very, very positive in terms of Eastern Ontario's positioning. The second sort of major theme was around economic diversity, and that has been talked about today quite a bit. And how do you improve the diversity of your economy? We've done some research on Eastern Ontario that looks at how diversified you are, and the way we did this in quite simple terms is if you think of Canada as the perfectly diversified economy, so it has a rating of 1. So how do you compare to the entire national economy? Surprisingly, there's huge variations. The Peterborough area rates incredibly high. I think it's 0.93. Ottawa is actually the lowest, 0.6. And I think if you think about the Ottawa economy, you think of the role of government, you think of the role of tourism. It's a very concentrated, focused economy. The challenge is that many of our rural economies are fare quite poorly, including the area that I represent in Prince Edward County. So these are issues that we have to look at. How do we address those? And some of the people have been talking today about entrepreneurial ecosystem, the need to develop supports, and certainly the supports that FedDev offer, are very important to that. In creating new sectors. How do you bring in, our keynote speaker, Dr. Coates, talked about new media in Stratford. How do you do that? Very, very inspirational, obviously pointing out some real challenges, but obviously having some very, very interesting opportunities. Increasing collaboration between business, government, and education, I think has been a theme from Yolande's opening comments today. And it's at all levels of business, micro businesses, medium-sized, small, and then big business, as well as all levels of government and all levels of education, as Susan just mentioned, from kindergarten right up to getting your PhD. And I'm glad to hear Ingrid's going to get hers. But we need to build more cooperation. We each have our own strengths and we each have our own weaknesses. And it's only through that collaboration that we can solve some of these problems. Increasing research and discussion between urban and rural communities. Mayor Garrettson talked about that this morning. We're having a rural conference and we're in downtown Kingston. This is where Queens is, and we're very pleased to be here. But it shouldn't be lost. The irony shouldn't be lost that we're here. It's important. It's critical that we work together. We cannot succeed separately. I think the policies that are going to be coming out as we move forward are going to be stressing that even more critically, is that we have to work together to succeed. And the last point is just maximizing local competitiveness. And competitiveness is usually divided into sort of a national competitiveness, sort of an industry mix. And then there's that local advantage. So what's in your community that makes you have an advantage? And we're doing a lot of research on that to try and figure out how do we investigate, how rural communities can build their local strengths. And I think that's been raised a couple of times. So I've really, really been impressed by the dialogue and discussion here today, and I'm really looking forward to some questions. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Maybe just as an opening question, thanks to each of you. Victoria, what you spoke about, how can we build Startup Canada? How can we do that? And we heard in Ken's lecture about sort of the need for communities to be committed to their own community and to their own growth. And so what do you think, what are the roles of different groups? What kind of collaboration between government, industry, entrepreneurs themselves are needed to bring forth a culture of innovation and a culture of entrepreneurship in rural Ontario?
Want me to take the first go? Yeah.
If you like, sure.
I mean, this was the topic of conversation of most of our national tour. And I'm just basically going to summarize what we heard on this front and how do we start up Canada from an entrepreneur's perspective. Now, we know Startup Canada has 300 partners across the country, organizations who support entrepreneurs at various stages of their entrepreneurial journey, also from different industries, youth, women, Aboriginal groups, newcomer associations. Ontario is really special. We have a great level of infrastructure in Ontario in comparison with what we see in other provinces, that's for certain. But what we're seeing generally across Canada and many Ontario communities as well, rural and urban, is still a lot of politicking amongst the stakeholders within the communities who are all chasing the same public funds in order to justify kind of continued securing of funds year after year. And that's normal for any organization. Entrepreneurs are going to hustle just as hard for funds. But then there's a big difference in the enterprise ecosystem of we have all these support organizations that serve entrepreneurs. We're public servants who serve entrepreneurs, yeah? But we're not being paid by the entrepreneurs, at least not directly. And so it kind of creates a bit of an issue that most nonprofits, charities, and government-funded organizations confront. So that means that there's a lot of duplication within communities of resources that exist, a lot of competition for the same entrepreneurial groups, a lot of waste at the end of the day, and ultimately entrepreneurs kind of, in many communities, kind of feel like everyone should just get out of the way. not in communities that work, though. In communities that work, the entrepreneurial stakeholders are working together in a genuine way. They have personal relationships that aren't dictated by their title as a professional, but by a person-to-person relationship. You have investors who go into work in FedDev, that go into work in the chamber, and you have an ecosystem where people move around really fluidly, like we see in Waterloo Region or in Toronto or in Vancouver, and in some really cool rural communities as well. So, and I'm thinking like Smithers, some cool things that we're seeing up there. And so definitely from a community building perspective, kind of just, I guess, speaking to the audience, it really is about coming together as a support ecosystem, because you're the support side of things. You're creating this entrepreneurial ecosystem from a top-down perspective, so that's really important. But what we're hearing from entrepreneurs of all ages, boomer entrepreneurs who want to start to give back into the community as mentors and as investors, is they want to be engaged now in that process. So what we have evolving in Canada and many of our communities, and this is what I'm working on addressing this year with the rollout of our programs come May, is you have the grassroots community that's mobilizing in their own culture with their own language. They're not using the words productivity, they're using the words lean. You know, it's the same, we're all going the same direction, but we're just using different words and it's a different culture. But we have a huge opportunity in Ontario right now with the regional innovation centers. So in order to build, I guess, a Startup Canada, what we need to do is take this grassroots community that operate in their own rebellious way, creating startups and startups again and failing and starting and failing faster, which is all really great for the culture. But then taking that awesome support infrastructure that we're so lucky to have in Canada and marry it up and start to understand that the role of the entrepreneurship ecosystem is to work alongside the entrepreneurs and to follow the entrepreneur. And I bet you in this room that many of you have been entrepreneurs, are entrepreneurs while you're in these roles. I mean, we all wear many hats. And so we can all kind of sympathize with what's happening in terms of the economy and the cultural issues that are emerging in the fragmentation that results from all of that. So I think to start up Canada, we need to put entrepreneurs at the center of the agenda and get them engaged, not just in asking them, what do you think, but actually involving them in the solutions, procuring their services, and helping them to grow as well as we start up Canada. So it really embracing the bottom up. We have a problem, I think, overall. I heard comments today about, okay, if you have a mentorship program, what are the metrics? What are the guidance documents? I think we have to get used to in an entrepreneurial ecosystem that things are going to be messy, you know, and that people are going to be moving around really quickly and we're never going to be fully caught up and we won't really be able to always measure our metrics and correlate one activity to having this outcome. And we have to be okay with that as our system matures. So I think Ontario is getting at a level of sophistication with our entrepreneurial ecosystem when I look at comparative ecosystems across the world, that we can start to be okay with the unknown and we can start being messy and trying new things because we have to right now. The world is changing, the global pipeline is changing, and my generation in 25 years will not have the stability that kind of our parents have. And I guess the final thing I would say, we talk about the connectivity, working together, enabling the grassroots community, and I think the last thing, and we were speaking about this a bit earlier, is culture. And culture is really intangible, and MEDI or MRI or whatever it's called now in Ontario. I mean, this organization has gone from fluff culture promotion to that makes no impact in terms of promoting entrepreneurship amongst youth in just entrepreneurship promotion. But I think we kind of need to go back and think about a big branding exercise for entrepreneurship in Canada if we really want to start up Canada, Ontario, and our rural communities in particular, where we need to keep people at home, building communities on the ground and keeping them excited about building their community, is getting youth involved at an earlier and earlier age. Cultivating it as part of the mindset. Careers are not linear anymore, they're everywhere. So how do we get our young people really, really engaged? How do we talk about entrepreneurs in the media? How do we celebrate them? How does the media profile them? How are we getting news about our entrepreneur successes to the media? Entrepreneurs are really bad at telling their own stories. They're heads are down, they're building their businesses. This community right here in the room has huge potential to be a big PR and marketing army to tell the story of the wonderful entrepreneurs that are coming out of of our rural communities, which is really exciting. We need to create a culture of paying it forward. That means giving before receiving. And I don't think that we have that yet in Ontario, and definitely we don't have that yet in every region in Canada. Atlantic Canada, really cool culture of giving back and knowing your neighbor. And I think we need to rediscover that in Ontario. I think we might have lost a bit of that, and I see that emerging with the grassroots culture. So I guess if we want to start up Canada, just kind of a summary remark on, I guess, this question. It's about coming together, but I think it's also about transitioning the way in which we think about entrepreneurship. And I mean, academics and policymakers, and I'm a policy wonk too, and I'm an entrepreneur, but we like to have narrow definitions of things, but entrepreneurship globally is completely shifting. It's no longer an economic activity, it's a social activity that requires that people bump in together and collide in order to come up with cool new innovations and to take things further. And if we want our entrepreneurs to think bigger, we need to really cultivate entrepreneurship as a mindset, not just an economic activity. So that's how I would start up Canada.
Great, thanks, Victoria. And we'll see if others have thoughts about lack of metrics. So.
Yeah.
Greg or Susan, collaboration and relationships, what's needed for success?
Well, I give, Susan asks for the metrics and I give them to her in our relationship, but I would pick up on one point, and it relates to the presentation on OSEB, and it talks about culture and positioning, and I didn't want to raise it while the presentation was being made, but it always struck me as really strange, for those of you that deliver the OSEB program, is how the provincial government positions that program. It positions that program as the program of last resort. So if you can't get a job, if you can't be retrained, then the last resort is, well, you might as well try and start your own business. Now, we talk about culture and attitude, and we were talking about just before the panel began here about how we view entrepreneurship and how do we encourage people to take risk. If the messaging from government is that being an entrepreneur is the absolute last thing you want to be, that kind of thing has changed. Now that's a knock on this time the provincial government, but I will give them a little bit of credit and give my colleague Susan some credit in that we're seeing, unlike I've seen in my sort of 10 years experience, we're seeing some collaboration between the federal and provincial government that we've never seen before. We're seeing people talking, we're seeing joint committees. I'm being invited to provincial functions for input on strategic planning for their regional innovation systems. This has never happened, it would just never have happened 10 years ago. So in a positive light, I guess we're moving forward in some regard, because that overlap, Conrad wanted to ask, he leaned over to me before he started speaking today, and he said, Craig, do you think I should ask the crowd how many people are paid to be here? I said, no, don't start with that. Because, what Conrad said, he said, there probably aren't a handful of people in this room that aren't paid to be here, and I'm paid to be here. So, again, it's a criticism. I'm really excited about the more work I do with the private sector, working with entrepreneurs. It reminds me of how hard they work, the challenges they face, and relatively how easy I have it to support them. I think we just have to re-energize ourselves and devote ourselves to helping them.
Great. Susan, do you have anything to add?
Well, Dr. Coates talked about grant application makers, and so I guess I'm part of that process, and many of you are my clients, and you're probably saying not grants, it's not the application process that we hate, it's the reporting process that we hate. And I mean, Victoria, you talked about it's messy, but the reality for government is that we do rely on metrics, and I think we need to be a bit creative in terms of how and what is defined as success. But the reality is that it is part of our business, and we've got to find a way, working with you, to really make sure that that our requirements aren't so onerous on you that you decide that it's not worth it to be part of the process. But I want to talk a little bit about collaboration, because that's one of the themes that I think is critically important. And these types of events allow us to have that dialogue, that sometimes we're so busy at our job that we forget we need to talk to others. I would say to communities, one of the things that you need to think about is you need to have a vision. And just like entrepreneurs, you need to be clear on what you want to do. Governments can't give you the vision. Governments can help and facilitate bringing people together. But at the end of the day, the vision has to belong to the community. And I think that's really important for me, in terms of rural communities, is that I don't want to see communities competing with each other. We got to find a way that we work together. And the federal government can play a role in terms of bringing partners together. But at the end of the day, it's the vision that's important. And I think the vision has to involve not just policymakers. I agree, Victoria. It needs to involve all different types of players. But you need a vision, because people can't come down and tell you what your vision is.
Great. Well, let's open it to the floor for reflection, responses, and questions. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask the panel, or reflections you'd like to contribute from an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I am not getting paid to be here.
Good.
I paid to be here.
Excellent.
And my name is Cheryl McComb, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm from Halliburton. And kudos to you, Victoria. I'm so thrilled to meet you, actually, because I follow you on social media and so on. I'm very interested in getting to know about Startup Canada. One of the things that I found to be very successful in my entrepreneurial life has been mentorship, and my focus is specifically women in business, and I've formed and successfully formed many women's mentoring groups, facilitated them, got them to a stage where they now had to expand to higher levels in order to find mentors that are going to impact them. So they're all volunteer, and they're just women who get together one morning a month or whatever and discuss issues that are pertinent to the being an entrepreneur and being a woman and a mother and the list. But having just moved to a rural community from a larger center, one of my challenges, and I'll look to you or anyone else in the audience who can help guide me with this, I'm looking to create an impact in my small community that's why I'm here today, with entrepreneurship, starting it at whatever level it needs to start at. But what have you found to be the best way for someone to not bulldoze their way into, the political arena or the business arena? I mean, I'm a director of the chamber and so on, done those steps. But the most effective way to create an impact or to create a system that's going to sustain itself and support the entrepreneurs that exist in that community. Is there any recommendations, because I'm open to any and all, of how to actually go in and take a step and begin that process?
Can I start?
Yeah, I think she directed it to you.
Craig,
Go ahead,
for-
Phil.
Okay. We'll start a startup community. On May 2nd, which is our first anniversary, we'll be 12 months old. We launched Startup Communities Canada, and part of that is creating a grassroots infrastructure of entrepreneurs helping each other, exactly what you've been doing. And a lot of it can be done online, as you know, which is really great as we increase broadband access. But also those on the ground morning events that you've been having are absolutely critical, like what we're doing today, and connecting and seeing each other and seeing our eyes. It's really, really, really important. So tapping into the network that already exists. The issue with Canada is because, well, what we're seeing is because it's so top heavy with such a strong public service, as you say, I think one of your points, Susan, was that we need entrepreneurs to step up and kind of take the podium now, because the infrastructure exists for us. And hopefully, you know, with your roles on the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations in the community, hopefully you're getting involved with your CFDC and with all of the organizations in the spaces, you can help to create a startup community from the grassroots there to help to connect the entrepreneurs together. But this infrastructure doesn't exist in Canada. We don't have a grassroots infrastructure that connects entrepreneurs. The closest thing we have is a Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce focuses on businesses. So if my company is a member of a Chamber of Commerce, then Chamber of Commerce is rock. And we need to make them more relevant to the next generation who don't see value in them any longer. So that means we need to reinvent what a Chamber of Commerce is. That's one side of things. But I think what you're going to see over the next few months in the next year is if you can cultivate a startup community in partnership with your regional innovation center, CFDC, Chamber of Commerce, and everything that's already happening, then you're bringing that grassroots community into a top-level infrastructure and giving entrepreneurs a voice in that community. And I couldn't echo enough the importance of what was said earlier about the community has to define the vision, and all of our jobs change, and when you're employed in a job, your job is not forever. Entrepreneurs in the community, they are entrepreneurs in the community, and especially if they're vested in the community and they have their tentacles deep into the community, they're not leaving. These are staples and pillars of the community that if we rally around, like what we've done in Ottawa with Terry Matthews and what's happening in Waterloo, if you rally around those anchor entrepreneurs, they have a vision for the community and they're going to fuel the community, and it doesn't matter what government policy comes in, they're going to do what they want at the end of the day. So the thing is really kind of connecting those entrepreneurs and start to build that vision for the community, for community leaders, and make sure that those entrepreneurs are part of that, because even when your organization is no longer funded, they're still there. And they might not be working on the same community or same startup they were working on 10 years ago, but they're still there. And so that's something that we've seen really work, is having those staple entrepreneurs who are serial entrepreneurs who are now giving back. But we should definitely connect and see how we can connect it up.
I guess I would just echo Victoria about connecting with your CFTC, Andy Campbell. I just saw some research that showed that how much better female entrepreneurs were than men. They're more capital efficient. They have higher revenue, higher profitability. Strangely enough, they fall way back when it comes to representation on boards and senior management positions, which is troubling. But I think that's all changed. What I would suggest is use an existing structure like the CFTC, and Andy's very creative, one of the most creative in the province, and focus on a women's mentorship program and approach Andy and say, hey, listen, I'd like to try this. Get a couple other female entrepreneurs together and do a little pilot. Because I'm happy to steal if you get it going and get some structure. I'm happy to steal any great ideas you have.
Cheryl, if I could just add a couple more comments. In fact, we did an analysis of the 37 CFDCs, and we found that there was a higher percentage of board representation by women on the CFDCs. That is not generally found across boards in the rest of the province. So I think that's an interesting indicator that the CFDCs are really promoting women entrepreneurship. I also have recently had discussions with senior officials at the Status of Women, and they're very interested in trying to nurture women entrepreneurship within Ontario. So I think there's a recognition within Ontario that we need to do more. There's women enterprise centers in Western Canada. I don't know if you've heard about them, but you may want to just do some research on that, because the government of Canada has provided funding to women entrepreneurial centers or women's enterprise initiative in Western Canada. And like I said, I think there is a growing interest with Status of Women. So if you want to give me your coordinates, I can link you in with those people.
And other entrepreneurs too, I'm sure, who are in the room, I'm sure our panelists would be glad to connect with you as well. Any other questions or thoughts for our panel? Yeah, over here.
Given that we're talking about enterprise in rural areas where there are distances involved, something I haven't heard at all today is the impact of increasing energy costs. and what implications that might have for rural revitalization. In my mind, and I hope that it happens, I think it will favor bringing business back to local levels. But I don't know, maybe I'm dreaming in Technicolor.
Craig.
My one point about business productivity, I did a little research, very unscientific, and asked 20 of my customers, do you use Skype or GoToMeeting or one of those either video or audio software to conduct meetings with clients, to make money? And none of them use that technology. You talk about saving money and energy costs. If we can't get our clients to start adopting some of the software, some of this technology that is free. Now, I know barriers of broadband are slow in some areas to be eliminated, but this technology saves you money, it's good for the environment, and it'll make you money. We have to get that word out that the use of this kind of productivity-saving technology is there and available.
Any other thoughts on that from the panel?
Well, FedDev has no responsibility for energy costs, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I will say that we recognize that there are barriers for all companies, right? And sometimes in urban areas, it's cost of living. In rural areas, it may be energy costs. I think it's about businesses recognizing, again, going back what Craig said, what is your competitive advantage? Not focusing on, obviously these are variables that you need to take into account in terms of building your business and sustaining it, but really focusing on what are your strengths and, is that enough to allow the business to kind of flourish and grow?
All I can do is draw from our experience on the tour, but it's very similar in Sydney, Nova Scotia. They have to drive all the way down to Halifax in order to grab the plane from Halifax to get anywhere in Canada, New York or Toronto for business meetings. And so it really frustrates the entrepreneurs. And then you ask them why are they still there, and it's because they really feel a sense of support from the communities. The entrepreneurs are super close with each other. They're building their communities together. They can do everything online. But at the same time, when we were in Toronto, Nova Scotia, and we asked the entrepreneurs the same thing, they're not staying. They're leaving. They're going to Halifax because of the travel and the commute. It doesn't make sense any longer. So I think it has to do with the strength of the community, how the community is branding itself. Sydney was really taken with Cape Breton, a huge tourism promotion, and they've really rallied around the small businesses around that. And so like Silicon Sydney, whatever it takes to brand your community and to get people impassioned about the community once again. And in Victoria, it's not a rural community in British Columbia, but what they did is they branded their community Techtoria, yeah? And when they bring people and investors to the community, they take them on a tour. There's not much to see just yet, but they have a big 25-year vision for the community. Here's our observatory. Oh, that's cool, observatory. But they excite the investors from the valley that they bring up, who they want to invest in what little few startups that they do have, because they're showing their long-term vision. Victoria is going to become a tech center in the Cascadia region. That's their vision, and they communicate it loud and clear. So I think, yeah, as said, every business, no matter where they're located, if you're in Vancouver, your costs are disgusting in terms of the taxes you pay just to live in the city. But it really is about how connected you feel to the community and how the community communicates to the entrepreneurs the value of being there, and how that kind of self-prophesizes each other and kind of feeds each other. So that's just from our experience.
Great. And I think, as Ken reminded, changing technologies with energy create new opportunities as well. So
Huge.
What opportunities are created? Maybe time for one last question. Yolande.
Actually, there's time for another question, because I just wanted to remind you that we are today talking about a project that has 14 sub-projects. So we've only looked at 4. So today we've not talked about the projects that look at transportation, and we have those. We've not talked about the projects that look at rural community sustainability and that address issues like the ones that you've so appropriately raised. So you must come back.
Thanks very much, Yolande. And one final question or comment? Oh, Jacques at the back.
I may be one of the few oddballs in here, as I'm a municipal employee. Council is the one who pays my salary. I've been wondering all day about this. Where do politicians fit in? Because I saw Mr. Mayor this morning, but it seems to me that they should be hearing some of these discussions that we heard throughout the day. And any thoughts on that? Because they're the ones I'm going to have to convince to get on side with development. And although I only do economic development on a part-time basis, well, I still have to come up with reasons for them to be interested. So I'm looking for arguments on your part.
Well, as a public servant who reports to politicians, politicians are critically important. They're the decision makers. And really, if you want things to happen, you need to have champions at all levels. So I think you need political champions, you need community champions, you need political champions at every level. So, mayors, city councilors, your local MPP, your local MP, regional ministers, premiers, prime ministers. They all play an important role. They critically important. I mean, they decide on where the funding goes. So, I mean, but it's you need to include them. And while they're not here, I don't think their absence is necessarily a sign they don't care. I mean, I'm here representing my minister, and so I think by default, you've got access to at least the federal perspective from FedDev Ontario, but I think it's politicians play an important role, and sometimes we dismiss them, but they are critically important in terms of the process. And while you may not see them at local meetings, they're there, and I think they need to continue to be part of the process.
As someone who was a politician for 13 years on municipal council, it's challenging. I think one of the biggest issues is communication. This whole topic about startups. I can remember sitting around the council table and we'd be asking our economic development people, have you landed got any big fish on the line? We were right along the 401 corridor, so we were hunting for the big plants. And I know if our economic development people come in and say, well, we're changing our strategy. We're not going after the Kellogg's and the 200s and the 500s. We're going after the ones and twos. You're gonna say, what are you talking about? Like I'm under pressure. Like my constituencies are asking me, what are you doing? Like my kids don't have jobs. Everybody's leaving. What are you doing? The plant closed. They need jobs. So you've got that pressure to deliver. I can appreciate that. You also have the pressure of re-educating them about infrastructure. I know there's a few councillors here from Prince Edward County. You're constantly dealing with infrastructure, and that's water, wastewater. The stuff that's buried, the roads that are so brutally expensive. The infrastructure today is accelerator, incubation space, broadband, these new infrastructures. And, sometimes they don't think about, those aren't the hard services that they normally associate with infrastructure. So it's a matter, I think, of re-educating them about how we have to move to those startups, because startups grow. And it's, in my opinion, it's better to have a strategy where you have 100, 10, and 15 employee companies than 1,000, because the economic shocks of losing that one is a killer. In startup research, you make a lot of decisions when you're starting a business. Unfortunately, some of those businesses are so catastrophically bad if you make the wrong decision that you're done. Nowadays, it's the same with economic development. If you lose one of your big companies, the community's virtually done.
Victoria, I wonder maybe as a closing word, in your travels across communities in Canada, have you seen maybe more functional communities where politicians have been engaged in the process?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't speak highly enough of Mayor Halloran in Waterloo. I mean, and there are amazing mayors who are doing amazing things across the country. But I mean, a mayor who connects with small business and who connects with the high growth sector in particular, given that entrepreneurship is increasingly being recognized as a pillar for development in Canada, I think is really important. But I mean, we had a lot of politicians come out to our events. We ran 200 events in 6 months, and we had lots of politicians come out for events. And sometimes it does get disheartening sometimes to just see the level of inaction and leaving right away when you really want to inspire them just as much as we're all inspired in the room. And I think if you have an opportunity to stick an entrepreneur in front of a politician, if they don't already have that business background, because some of them do, and that makes them really rich politicians. But if they don't yet have that business background, stick a few young entrepreneurs in front of them and just see what happens. Let them go at the mayor, and it can be really, really exciting. I think something else that we confront, and I rattle my brain, and I would love to chat with anyone who has any ideas afterwards. But my experience in this is that this is a long-term game. Waterloo didn't happen overnight. Boulder, Colorado didn't happen overnight. And if we want to cultivate these things, we can't just be motivated by short-term kind of political terms. We need to really have a long-term vision. And what I don't see, and what's really disheartening, even with the Trudeau campaign, and they say it's galvanizing the youth. Well, don't be so sure. I mean, we're all really confused right now. But really to see that bold leadership, like where's the vision, where's the leadership, where can we take it forward? Pragmatism is really important, and that's what's got us through the economic recession, and nobody kind of takes that lightly in Canada. But I think this is a time where we can be bold and reassert ourselves on the global stage. So I think we need to start taking a long-term approach as a nation. What is our vision for Canada? How does the energy sector play into this? How do our high-growth businesses play into it? So I think that's a conversation we have to come to. And I guess the only thing else I would say about kind of when you're speaking with politicians is we're always looking for productivity. We're always looking to kind of take a lean approach. Working with startups is as lean as you can get because they'll work for free to get their first client, And so we have all these open spaces that can turn into co-working spaces really easily. It doesn't need $500,000 thrown at a new building. What it needs is an entrepreneur to open their door to the free space that's already in there. So it's a completely new way of thinking about the assets we already have in our communities and how we create productive gains out of exploiting them, and how politicians see that leveraging what we already have and making it kind of more efficient in grassroots can actually both have more productive outputs, but also a lot more efficiency and save cash. So there's a lot of things we can do to engage our ministers and our mayors, but I think we all need to be doing a better job and kind of develop a unified voice as to what we actually want, because I'm not sure we even know what that is yet.
I would just add, I think we're very fortunate in Eastern Ontario to have a great deal of momentum with our Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus and the collaborative work that's happened between municipalities on broadband, and the potential that lies ahead for further collaborative work between governments and municipalities. And also municipal governments alongside provincial and federal collaborating together. I think we'll wrap up our panel there. We want to thank our three panelists for their insightful thoughts and hope it was an engaging end to the day. And I'll ask Dr. Scott Carson, Director of the Moneson Centre, to come forward and offer some closing comments.
Well, that was fantastic, and thank you very much, Craig, because I was just trying to think what I would say by way of closing comment, and then he said it. Very mean-spirited. I think I got you the job at Queen's, too. But I mean, as Craig said, there are many places, and you know them, that really see economic development as a recruitment strategy. Any employer is a good employer, and the bigger the employer, the better. Reopen the mine. Is there a white knight that would come along and replace the mass employment that was lost when the mine or the mill closed? But as Craig pointed out, that's very, very important, but it can't be the whole strategy. And I think fortunately for us today, what we've heard is something very different, and something different than we would have heard 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years ago at a conference like this. Because what we're hearing today is the tremendous importance of strategy, and you heard that from Steleric, and you heard that from our lunchtime address as well. And throughout the day, we've talked about enablers, about supporting entrepreneurs and nurturing them and financing them adequately. And again, as Craig pointed out, about efficiency and productivity and the kind of things that are very, very essential to the successful completion of a strategy. And so that's all good. It's scary. It's certainly not a solution. And all of you will say, well, but look at all these problems that I've got to address and deal with, and politicians and energy costs and the rest. But you've got to start somewhere, and I think this is a very good start. And I, for one, felt very energized by the day. I felt, there's a lot there. It's enthusiastic. It's heading in the right direction. The kind of conversations that we're having today are, in my view, the right kind of conversations to have. The other ones are dead end. The other ones are locked in history, and this is forward-looking and exciting. So congratulations to all of you for the very fine work that you do. So it just falls to me to do two things in closing it up. The first is to do some thank yous. Jeff, thank you very much for the organization of such a fabulous conference. To Carrie Regan, who's been in charge of the production of all of the events, for delivering food on time. The microphones have worked and all has been well, Carrie. And to Jane O'Donnell and Anne Beaubien, working with Carrie and bringing it along. So please join me in thanking them very much for. So a successful event is often one where you don't notice all the things in the back room, but they've done a great job.